What happens when a flight attendant slaps a woman she thinks is posing as a fraud, and then it turns out she owns the airplane, the airline, and the ability to give jobs to people? When she arrived at the airport, she admired the airplane that under the rays of the rising sun glistened, polished so brightly it was almost blinding to look at. One would never have guessed that it was her plane, her pride, the result of years of working from scratch, because people like Maya, quiet, with dark-colored skin, never looked like owners to those who had already decided what power should look like. She climbed the short stairs, lightly hooking her heel on the ladder, and inside the cabin everything was very quiet. Leather seats and black oak panels. She set her bag next to the seat she always preferred. Left side, third row, with a view of the ocean to think about and to breathe. Once seated in her favorite seat, she took off her jacket and laid it on the seat. This flight was a routine trip to Atlanta, a short stop for a meeting where her company planned to invest $1 billion, then back to Miami by evening. And Maya, being who she was, instinctively checked her watch and noted that, as usual, she was early, because she liked to be early. It gave her a chance to be quiet before the day took over. But that quiet, that calm peace she allowed herself in small doses, didn't last long when from behind her came a sudden harsh voice that could only come from assumption. "Excuse me, who are you, and what have you forgotten in this place? This is for VIP passengers." Maya turned slowly and saw a stewardess of about 28, slim, with dark hair pulled back in a bun that looked like it was in pain, walking down the aisle with suspicion practically stamped into her posture, arms down like a soldier preparing for an unconventional war, and Maya kept her voice steady, her body language calm. Rebecca, as she would later find out, had not softened because her idea of belonging did not include women like Maya, and stopped a few feet away from her, her posture aggressive, her jaw clenched, her words cut short when she asked, "And who authorized you to board this airplane?" Maya was confused for a second, wondering if this was real life or some weird social experiment as a joke, because the feeling was shocking. But she pulled herself together and calmly replied, "The airplane belongs to me and my family." The words came out flat and unwavering, but the reply was a laugh so harsh it could have cut a huge tree. Rebecca's laughter was awful. "Yes, of course it belongs," she said, rolling her eyes as if she had already heard it all from the other passengers. "Ma'am, I need you to leave the plane, not slowly." And for a second, Maya didn't move, just stared at the woman in front of her, watching, analyzing, trying to determine if this was reality, arrogance, or something much more dangerous. Because Rebecca's gaze didn't look joking or curious, it was raw and serious, as if she had already decided that Maya was lying, stealing something that never belonged to her. And Maya stepped forward, not aggressive, just firm, and said in the same, even voice, "I'm Maya Thompson. I'm the owner of Thompson Air. This is my plane." And for a moment there was a silence so loud it seemed like thunder was about to roll through the cabin. But instead of backing away, instead of listening, Rebecca's face contorted even more, her hands clenched on her chest like armor, and her voice sounded harsher. "You have to leave." Louder this time, splitting the air in two, and Maya felt the anger rising in her chest like smoke from a smoldering flame, but she swallowed, forced herself not to move, to stay calm, because that's what strength looks like, not in screaming, not in losing control, but in standing your ground without breaking. But before she could say a word, Rebecca stepped over the line, reached out, and grabbed Maya's arm. And that's when the situation went from awkward to dangerous, because Maya instinctively yanked her hand away in a sharp, controlled movement, her voice a few degrees colder but still calm, without panic when she said, "Let me go." And it wasn't a plea. It was an order, but Rebecca didn't back down, didn't reassess the situation, didn't even pause, but stepped closer, eyes narrowed, voice low and venomous. "You think you can just walk on a private property and trick yourself into flying freely?" And the words came out like venom, enveloping her with judgment and disbelief, and Maya stared at her, hard, unwavering, and said clearly, "I am not in the business of cheating. I'm the reason this airplane exists. You don't know who you're talking to." Outside, beyond the walls of the cockpit, the engines on the runway came to life, their distant hum building up, but inside, the world collapsed, and only the two women stood a few centimeters apart, a silent confrontation strained by assumptions. And for a moment Maya thought reason would finally penetrate her, that Rebecca would stop and realize the mistake she was making, but instead her gaze flickered to Maya's clothes. Simple jeans. Maya didn't look like a CEO, didn't fit the image of a woman powerful enough to own a private jet, didn't look like the white-haired men in suits she'd imagined, and Maya could see the whole thing playing out behind Rebecca's eyes like a movie with a tired, predictable ending. So she tried again, slower, harder. "Get the captain," she said. "Get." But no sooner had she finished the sentence than Rebecca raised her hand in a fit of rage and slapped her. The sound traveled through the cabin like a clap of thunder, sharp, violent, echoing off the polished wood and leather, and Maya didn't stumble, didn't cry out, didn't even flinch. She just stood there, slowly raising one hand to touch her cheek. Brown eyes staring at Rebecca with a cold, frightening calm, and for the first time Rebecca's expression wavered. Behind them the first passengers began boarding, chatting casually with bags in hand, but at the sight of this scene they froze, stopped. Short, and the silence that ensued was instantaneous and absolute. You could hear a pin drop, and one man, a tech executive from Austin, dropped his coffee cup on the floor. They all looked at Maya, no longer with suspicion, but with horror. Because what they saw was not a confrontation, but an act of violence, unjustified and public, and Maya let the moment stretch, let every second wrap around them like a wire, and though her cheeks still burned, she didn't touch it again, didn't react, didn't pull back, but calmly reached down, lifted her blazer, brushed an invisible stain off her sleeve, and Rebecca froze, her mouth slightly open, her breathing shallow, and you could almost see the wheels turning in her head, the calculations, the panic, followed by a stuttering threat. "I'll call security," she said in a shaky voice, one hand fumbling for the small walkie-talkie on her belt. "You're trespassing," she added, but her words sounded hollow, uncertain, as if she were trying to take control of a moment that had long since slipped from her fingers, and Maya didn't act quickly, didn't raise her voice, didn't tense up. She just slipped one hand into her jacket, then the other, buttoned it carefully, and said, "Please, call them." A few of the new passengers exchanged nervous glances. Some backed slightly toward the door, not knowing whether to stay or flee, but no one dared to intervene. The whole plane seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would light the wick already soaked in kerosene. And then the cockpit door finally opened from the front of the cabin, and the captain stepped out, a tall man with swarthy skin and silver dust in his hair. Furrowed his brows in confusion as he examined the frozen picture before him, and as soon as his gaze fell on Maya, recognition lit up his face, quickly turning into something harder and sharper, and his voice rose above the tension like a beacon when he said, "Miss Thompson, is everything all right?" Rebecca turned to face him, her expression contorted with confusion, her lips struggling to utter the words, "Ms. Thompson?" Maya didn't answer her, continuing to look at the captain, and with a slight nod, she spoke in a calm voice, "Captain Blake, I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding," and Captain Marcus Blake immediately stepped forward. His body movements were respectful but watchful. His eyes never left Rebecca as he said firmly, "I'm sorry, ma'am. We will deal with this immediately." And at that moment the color completely disappeared from Rebecca's face. Her posture collapsed inward, like a structure realizing too late that its foundation was hollow, and she looked around in despair, as if looking for someone, anyone, who could reverse the moment, erase the consequences. "This woman said the plane belongs to her," and then Maya turned to face her, her eyes like stone, her voice steady and quiet but heavy. "I don't just own the airplane," she said. "I own the company. Thompson Air. This plane, this flight, every employee on it, including you." And the words settled over the cabin like ash, final and undeniable, and Rebecca didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out of it. And the silence was so complete it pressed against the walls, the passengers frozen in place, the tension replaced by stunned disbelief. But Maya wasn't done yet, not now, because humiliation was only the beginning of what would follow. And reaching into the inside pocket of her jacket with slow precision, she pulled out a sleek black business card edged in gold foil, minimalist and powerful, and placed it carefully on the nearest table between them, like a glove thrown in a duel, and on it, in clear, sharp letters, were written the words, "Maya Thompson, CEO and founder of Thompson Air," and Rebecca stared at it like it might explode, her hands twitching, her throat jerking as she tried to swallow the truth, the walkie-talkie still dangling in her fingers. Like a weapon she no longer knew how to use, and the murmuring began again around her. Passengers shook their heads, Some whispered to each other. Some had phones in their hands and cameras aimed discreetly to capture the aftermath. And Captain Blake leaned over to Rebecca and said in a low but firm voice, "You must apologize." Immediately, and those words seemed to hit her harder than the captain probably intended. Her whole body tensed as if preparing for a blow, her eyes darting between him and Maya, as if she still couldn't come to terms with who she'd hit, who she'd suspended, who she'd publicly disrespected in front of a dozen strangers. For a long moment, Rebecca just stood there, jaw clenched, shoulders hunched, body tense, as if somewhere deep inside she still believed she could get out of this situation through persuasion or denial. But then something changed, some understanding flashed in her eyes. And all the air seemed to rush out of her as her posture sagged and her lips parted in a weak, shaky sigh. I'm sorry," she stammered, and the words fell into the space between them like a glass dropped on tile, brittle, empty, utterly insufficient, and Maya didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't soften, because it wasn't an apology, it was a reflex. A survival instinct, not a confession, and Maya wasn't here for theatricality, but to make sure the lesson was remembered, so she said nothing, just watched, letting Rebecca squirm in the ensuing silence, letting the full weight of what had just happened take hold in the cabin in awkward immobility, because it wasn't just a slap, it was a judgment, an assumption, a denial of value based on skin, style, some internal script that Rebecca remembered so well she didn't question it anymore. And when Maya finally made a move, it wasn't a punishment but a reminder, and her hand reached for the gold-rimmed business card again, tapped it with a manicured finger, then slid it forward slightly, closer to the trembling hands of Rebecca, who stared at it as if she could brand it. And when Maya spoke again, her voice was lower, quieter but sharper. "You didn't just insult me," she said. "You insulted every woman who has ever had to prove her place in a room she built herself." And her words didn't rise in anger, they fell like lead, hard and slow, and Rebecca's face flushed, her eyes glistened, but the tears did not fall, for even her guilt was not ready to be witnessed, and Captain Blake stood a step back, watching intently. His hands folded, his jaw clenched not in aggression, but in professional disappointment, and after a long pause he asked quietly, "Would you like her taken off the flight, Miss Thompson?" Maya didn't answer immediately, glancing around at the passengers, the frozen staff, and back at Rebecca, who now looked small, unprotected, like a child caught stealing something incomprehensible, and Maya could have ruined her, publicly fired her, pressed charges, blacklisted her forever. But instead Maya breathed in through her nose, slow and steady, and said with absolute clarity, "No, she will stay." And those words hung in the air like the unexpected ending to a story everyone thought they'd already read. And Rebecca raised her head, her mouth slightly open in disbelief because it sounded like mercy, but it wasn't, not really. Because Maya wasn't done, and the rest sounded just as calm. "You will serve me," she said, "with respect, with care, as you should have from the beginning. Let's see if you learn anything today." And for a second Rebecca thought she might collapse right in the aisle, her arms shaking so visibly that she had to clutch at the seat beside her to keep herself upright. Maya turned away with slow finality and sat down, crossing one leg over the other, her presence radiating a power that didn't scream, it simply existed, and it demanded correction from anyone who didn't recognize it. And when she settled, the entire cabin seemed to emit a collective sigh that no one suspected. Rebecca stood there, not knowing what to do, huddled in the wreckage of her own creation, while every eye in the room assessed her, silently rewriting her perception in real time. And slowly, reluctantly, she adjusted her jacket, smoothed her skirt, and took a step back, forced to become something she wasn't ready for, a student. And the silence that prevailed in the cabin as the plane prepared for takeoff was not the usual polite silence of pre-flight procedures. It was heavy, almost reverent, as if everyone was afraid of upsetting the delicate balance of dignity that had just been so violently disturbed and then so powerfully restored. And Rebecca, now frozen like a mannequin, Rebecca moved like a marionette, each step jerky and unsure, her smile forced and fragile as she offered drinks to new passengers, her voice jerky and hollow, her eyes constantly darting to Maya but never meeting her gaze, because every time she looked in Maya's direction, she no longer saw just a passenger, she saw a reminder of her own failure. And not the ones that can be smoothed over with protocol or brushed aside with study guides, but the ones that splinter your reflection when you look in the mirror and realize that your instincts, your assumptions, your gut reactions had been poisoned. And outside the windows, Charleston disappeared beneath them as the plane rose into the morning sky, and Maya didn't speak, didn't gesticulate, didn't demand attention, because she didn't need it. Her silence spoke louder than any confrontation, and everyone felt it, the shift in energy. The subtle change in the center of gravity in the room. And about 2 hours into the flight, Rebecca walked over to Maya's seat again, her hand smoothing the hem of her jacket, her voice almost a whisper. "Would you like something to drink?" "Ma'am?" Maya slowly opened her eyes, her expression unreadable, and she replied, "Water. Room temperature. No ice," and Rebecca nodded so quickly it was like a bow and removed herself to the galley as if her life depended on it, and the passengers watched from the corners of their eyes, pretending to leaf through their phones or magazines, but no one missed the ritual. Because this wasn't just a drink, it was a penance, it was proof of change, or at least an attempt at it. And when Rebecca returned, her hands trembling slightly as she set the glass on the tray table with both hands, making sure not a single drop spilled, her movements careful, reverent, and Maya looked at the water, then at her, and finally said, "Thank you." And though the words were simple, ordinary words, spoken by Maya in that moment, they sounded like a sentence, and Rebecca stepped back, nodded briefly but shakily, and then turned and withdrew again. And the rest of the flight passed in a strange suspension, no announcements, no disruptions, just the soft hum of the plane cutting through the clouds, and the quiet weight of realization hanging over everyone on board because the incident was over. Yes, but its aftermath was still unfolding like ink spreading across a page long after the pen had gone forward. But the real reckoning awaited them after landing, because as the plane descended smoothly into Atlanta Terminal and the wheels touched the ground with a soft hiss, the bright southern sun had already risen higher in the sky, casting long shadows on the tarmac. And the atmosphere in the cabin, though outwardly calm, everyone realized that this was not a story that would end at the landing gear and seatbelt sign. And when Captain Blake made the standard announcement thanking the passengers for flying with Thompson Air, there was a note of awareness in his voice, tighter, more cautious than usual, and as people rose from their seats and gathered their belongings, there was a quiet buzz in the cabin, tension humming beneath the surface, and then, as the door opened and the stairs neared the ground, a man in a dark suit came aboard. And he wasn't a pilot or an attendant, he was from the corporation, from Maya's corporation, and as soon as Rebecca saw him, her face lost the rest of its color, her breath caught, her hands fumbled clumsily with the clasp of her apron, as if they could somehow buy time, or forgiveness, or both, and she froze, every instinct telling her that this was far from over, and now the consequences were coming. In polished boots, with a tablet under his arm, but he didn't say a word, he didn't need to. His mere presence told her that this incident would not be swept under the rug, and Maya took her time, waited for all the other passengers to disembark, and slowly made her way to the front of the plane where Rebecca and the man in the suit were standing, and for a moment, Rebecca thought she might fall to her knees, or run, or beg. Her lips twitched in the rudiments of a desperate apology. But Maya didn't give her that opportunity, didn't offer the grace of a speech, because this wasn't a conversation, it was a message, and Maya's voice came through low and clear. "People will forget what you said," she said, not without anger, but with a gravity that made Rebecca's knees go up. "They'll forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel." Rebecca blinked rapidly, her breathing hitching, her whole body leaning forward slightly as if gravity itself was pressing down on her, and Maya continued, voice steady, "You made me feel invisible. Like I had no place in the room I built with my own hands. Like I have to prove my worth just to sit down." And the corporate man fell silent, giving Maya the floor with the deference of a man who understands hierarchy without having to spell it out, and Maya stepped closer, not threatening, just unmistakable, and said, "And it's going to cost you more than this job will." And Rebecca grabbed her hand on the doorframe to keep herself on her feet. Her world spun, not from the movement, but from the impact, the realization, the quiet devastation of being a cautionary example before she even realized the lesson had been taught. Maya didn't yell, didn't demand, didn't grovel, she didn't need to, because her power lay not in volume but in presence, and without looking back again, she turned and stepped off the plane into the blazing Atlanta sun, her steps unhurried. Her shadow left far behind, and Rebecca stood, pressed to the floor, trapped in the wreckage of her own creation, and outside, in the private terminal, Maya fixed her sunglasses with one hand, picked up her bag with the other and kept walking. The sharp click of heels on the polished floor echoed behind her like the punctuation to a sentence that Rebecca would replay in her head for years. But the most important part of the journey was not the flight, but the message left in the air, thick and undeniable to all who watched it unfold. Outside, by the sleek black town car, Maya's driver, a tall woman, hair pulled back, was waiting with the back door open, and Maya handed over her bag without a word, slid into the back seat, and exhaled as the door slammed shut behind her. And though her cheek still ached where Rebecca's hand had struck, that wasn't what stayed with her. The truth she'd always known, but which she had to prove anew, remained. How easily people decide who deserves respect and who doesn't, how quickly they determine your worth by your clothes, your skin, your posture, the stories they carry before you open your mouth, and how sometimes the loudest revenge isn't noise, but stillness, refusal to shrink when the world tries to shrink you.